This week I want to start off with a quote by management consultant Myra Kassem, and she said, "In the absence of information, we jump to the worst conclusions." This quote is perfect for setting up a discussion about informative speaking and the duo speeches. We want to really focus on teaching the audience a small bit of information in the informative speech so that they can then draw their own conclusions in the persuasive speech. So today we want to talk about the what of informative speaking and the how of informative speaking. So first, the what of informative speaking deals with the definition and types of informative speeches. Dr. Grice and Dr. Skinner say a speech to inform imparts knowledge, enhances understanding, or facilitates the application of information. Now, some of you have chosen speech topics that the audience really doesn't know a lot about, and therefore you need to give us new information, impart new knowledge to us. Others have chosen topics where we already understand the basics of the issue, and we need to kick that understanding up a notch, meaning we want to enhance our understanding of that particular topic. And lastly, some of us will be teaching how to perform something, and therefore we are going to be facilitating the application of information. A lot of people feel like the informative speech is the more boring of the two, and I really have to disagree, because if you can find a neat, cool way to teach a small bit of information, that can be a lot of fun for your audience. So you can talk about people, objects, places, events, the process or concepts, even the conditions or issues underlying your topic. But all of your speeches are going to fall into one of four categories. The first category of an informative speech is a definition speech. In this type of speech, you are really giving us the basic concepts, defining things and explaining them so that the audience will be able to apply these concepts in the persuasive speech. Some of you will be giving a descriptive informative speech. This is where you create a vivid picture of a person, place, or even an event in time. Some of you may be giving explanatory informative speeches. This is where you're explaining maybe the underlying theory or philosophy behind your topic. And some of you will be teaching us how to do something, and so therefore that is a demonstrative informative speech. Because of the nature of the duo speeches, I really think most of us will be giving either a definition or an explanatory style informative speech. So now that we know what informative speaking is, how do we actually do it? Right now I'm going to walk you guys step by step how to create your informative speech outline. So this portion of the lecture is a demonstrative informative speech, whereas the first half was really a definition style informative speech. Once you've chosen your topic, you first formulate your specific purpose statement. Remember, back from the self-introduction speech, we have three parts to a specific purpose: the general purpose, the audience, and the goal of the speech. My example for this lecture is going to be the topic of baking cookies. So my specific purpose statement is to inform my classmates of the steps to baking cookies. The general purpose is to inform, the audience is my classmates, and the goal of the speech is the steps to baking cookies. Once you have your specific purpose, you're ready to write your thesis statement. Remember, a thesis statement is one sentence that summarizes the overall message. You want to take the goal of the speech part of the specific purpose statement and churn it into one complete sentence that really captures your message. So, if you take a look at my specific purpose statement here, my thesis statement will be: baking cookies is a step-by-step process that involves basic ingredients and cooking methods. Now we're ready to figure out our main points, and that brings us to our organizing question. Basically, you take the specific purpose statement and you churn it into a question. This question is going to help you figure out what type of organizational pattern you're using, as well as your main points. So let's go back to the specific purpose: to inform my classmates of the steps of baking cookies, and let's just flip it into a question. What are the steps to baking cookies? Now we need to answer our question, and that's going to tell us two things. First, it's going to tell us the type of pattern we're using. Remember the 5 types of organizational patterns. We have topical, where we organize our main points according to subtopics of something, and that's really great if any of you have types of something in your specific purpose statement. We have spatial, which is where we organize our main points according to geographic location, and that's great if you're talking about the parts of something in your specific purpose. We have causal, which is the first main point is all the causes, and the second main point is all the effects. Now we have to be careful that we don't slip into persuasive territory here, but causal is really good if you are doing the causes and symptoms of a type of medical issue. We also have chronological, which indicates a time sequence, and this is really great if you're talking about the history of something or the process of something. And lastly, we have pro-con, which is really good if you have a very controversial issue and you would present all the pros and all the cons for that particular topic. Now, my example is actually a chronological pattern because I'm talking about the steps or the process of something. Next, your organizing question is going to help you figure out what your main points are. Now, this step really does require doing research. I don't really expect you guys to just know the answer to your organizing question off the top of your head. I would really recommend doing a little bit of background research to answer it. So let's pretend I go to Brown Library and I start researching the scholarly databases and I find a bunch of information that really kind of breaks down the steps of baking cookies into 3 main steps. First, you get all the materials together, prepare your ingredients, and then finally you bake the cookies. So I know my 3 general steps, but they're not very memorable and there's no rhyme or rhythm to them. So here I want to apply parallel wording. Remember from the self-introduction speech that parallel wording is when you use similar words or similar phrases to state your main points. It will be easier for you as the speaker to remember, and it will also be easier for the audience to follow along and hopefully remember your main points due to that repetition. So let's take my main points and use the magic of parallel wording, and we get the preparation step, the ingredient step, and the baking step. This is going to be much more memorable for the audience, and it's going to be easier for me as the speaker to keep things really simple. And now we want to develop the main points using the 4S strategy. We've already done this in the self-introduction speech, but now we're building upon those skills and doing it in a more formalized manner. The 4S strategy will allow you to clearly and concisely explain each main point. The first S is signpost. We want to start each main point with a signpost word such as initially, first, second, finally. A signpost is a great way to wake up the audience and help them realize that a new main point is starting. The second S is state. We want to state the main point using that parallel wording in a complete sentence. Again, this tells the audience exactly where they are in your speech. The third S is support. We support the main point with a variety of supporting material and evidence. This is where all your research comes into play. And lastly, we summarize the idea. This is where in just a quick sentence we want to summarize and wrap up that main point before we transition to the next one. So let's take a look at an example. My first main point in my example of baking cookies was the preparation step. So here is what my main point looks like on my outline. First, the preparation step begins with gathering the right baking materials, which include an oven and oven mitt, a timer, a baking sheet, a mixing bowl and mixer, and of course a spoon. According to Mrs. Field's 2013 book, How to Make the Perfect Cookie, make sure the oven is preheated at 350 degrees and that the timer and oven mitt are handy. You want to make sure that you've greased the baking sheet with vegetable oil so the cookies won't stick to the pan. And Mrs. Field says it's a good idea to have your mixing bowl and mixer set up on an open and flat counter space. Have that spoon ready to spoon out the cookies and then lick the bowl later on. But part of your preparation should also include gathering your ingredients. Betty Crocker said in her seminar at the 2012 Culinary Institute Fair that the basic ingredients for every cookie include water, all-purpose flour, sugar, butter, and eggs, baking soda, salt, and the pizzazz of your choice. Crocker defines pizzazz as any ingredient that gives a cookie its unique flavor. And this can be anything from peanut butter to chocolate chips to raisins or candy. Crocker said that this is the fun part of baking a cookie. So as you can see, the perfect cookie begins with preparation of your cooking materials and ingredients. Now let's find the 4S strategy in this example. The first S is signpost, and I've decided to use the word first as my signpost to signal to the audience that I'm starting my first main point. The second S is state, and you can see that I have done that right here in the first sentence. I included the parallel wording, the preparation step, but I also put it into a complete sentence that really set up that whole point. The third S is support, and here's where all my research comes into play. I have two sources here, one from Mrs. Field's 2013 book and another from Betty Crocker's 2012 seminar. Your speeches should have a variety of sources. 1 to 2 sources per main point is a good rule of thumb. Also notice the type of supporting material that I'm using here. So I've used a lot of expert testimony, primarily paraphrase expert testimony, with a little bit of direct quote testimony when I use the word pizzazz. I also have an example here as well, right here when I talk about the types of things that you can use in your cookie. And so this is a factual example. Your main points should have a variety of types of supporting materials as well. Our last S is summarize, and my last sentence here quickly wraps up that main point. So you want to use the 4S strategy to develop each of your main points. The next step is to put in transitions in between those main points to help the audience follow along. Again, we've already used transitions in the self-introduction speech, but now we want to kick it up a notch and build on those skills. There are 4 types of transitions. Complementary transitions are sentences that build upon the topics or build upon the main points. They're really good for highlighting the similarities between main points. In that way, they're really good for topical organization as well as spatial organization. Complementary transitions use a lot of words such as likewise, also, or in addition to. Causal transitions are sentences that show how the first main point caused the second main point. Use a lot of words like because of, as a result of, or therefore. Causal transitions are really good for causal organizational patterns, can also be really good for chronological patterns as well. Contrasting transitions are sentences that show how the main points are different from one another. So you can imagine that this would be really great for a pro-con organization. It could also be good for topical and spatial as well if the main points have key differences between them. And the last type of transition is a chronological transition, and this includes sentences that demonstrate some type of time sequence and explain the flow of time between the first main point and the second. Now, I'm using a chronological pattern, and I've decided to use a chronological transition in my example. So now that we have all our materials and ingredients, we have to actually do something with these items. That will then lead me into my second main point, next, the ingredient step, and I would continue on from there. Now that we have the body complete, we want to go back and work on the introduction. And the introduction has 5 parts: the attention getter, focus on topic, credibility, relevance, and preview of main points. Nothing new here, the same 5 parts that we used in the last speech. Let's take a look at my example. In the attention getter up here, I decided to use a statistic to really grab the audience's attention. According to an April 2014 article in Consumers Report, Americans spend over $4.5 billion on cookies alone. Now, just a disclaimer, I've totally made up all the sources in this particular example, but you can imagine that a shocking statistic would really do a great job of grabbing the audience's attention. For focus on topic, you'll notice that I just plugged in my thesis statement here. Baking cookies is a step-by-step process that involves basic ingredients and cooking methods. For relevance, I tried to connect to the audience through a common experience, so I used a hypothetical example to do so. I'm sure many of us have memories of eating cookies and milk at night before going to bed, or of giving our kids the same treat. In your credibility statement, here's where you need to explain to the audience why you're qualified to talk about this. So you guys can talk about why you're interested in a topic. Maybe you have personal experience with your topic. Maybe you've studied it, or it's part of your career, or you've received certifications or awards for it. In my case, I've been baking cookies for many years and recently won a local award for the best oatmeal raisin cookie. Again, a little disclaimer, this is a bit of a lie because I do not bake whatsoever. Lastly, we have the preview of main points, and this is where we state our parallel wording. The three basic steps are the preparation step, the ingredient step, and the baking step. Now that we finished the introduction, we're ready to work on the conclusion, which is short and sweet and to the point, and it only has two parts, the summary of main points and circular closure. In my summary, you can see that I have repeated my parallel wording. So now that you guys know the preparation step, the ingredient step, and the baking step, you're well on your way to becoming the next Mrs. Fields or Betty Crocker. And circular closure, I decided to refer back to that opening statistic. So maybe instead of buying $4.5 billion in cookies this year, you can make some of your own. Once you have the outline complete, you want to make sure that you've cited your sources very carefully. If you haven't done so, make sure that you review the informative speech requirements under speech information so you can find out the time limit, the number of required cited sources, and the number of required visual aids. So we already have experience citing sources in the self-introduction speech, but now we want to refine that skill. We basically cite a source three different ways: an oral footnote, a parenthetical citation, and a bibliography. The oral footnote is what you actually say out loud when you are presenting your speech. You'll also be typing this out in your outline so that you'll remember to say it. In the oral footnote, you tell us the name of the author and the year of the publication. The parenthetical citation is simply typed on your outline, and it's this piece in parentheses here. We have the last name of the author and the year of the source. This is a transferable skill. It's something that you'll do in your research papers if you aren't already, and it also allows me to quickly fact check your information. Lastly, you have your bibliography or works cited at the end of the outline, and this is where you put the MLA or APA citation for your source. You can always use the Writing Center or the resources on the Brown Library website for help with citing an MLA or APA. I want to go back and show you guys how you would put the oral footnotes and the parenthetical citations in your outline. If you take a look at my sample first main point, I have two sources here. My first source is this Mrs. Fields 2013 book, How to Make the Perfect Cookie, and you can see that I've stated both the name of the source and the year here in my oral footnote. I also have my parenthetical citation in parentheses where I have Fields, the last name of the author, as well as the year. Take a minute and count how many oral footnotes you see in this outline. If you said 5, you are correct. The first is right up here, according to Mrs. Fields' 2013 book. And because I use that source again, I put in what I call a little reminder oral footnote. Mrs. Fields says. That just helps the audience remember or reminds them where you got your information from. The third is Betty Crocker's 2012 seminar. And then again, I use that source a couple more times, so I have a few little reminder oral footnotes, Crocker defines, and Crocker said. So now you know the what of informative speaking and the 4 types of informative speeches. We also know the how of informative speaking and how to work through that step-by-step process for the informative speech outline. So we can create information in this first speech that will give the audience a good background understanding of our topic. That way, later on in the semester, the audience won't jump to conclusions. Instead, they will be moved to take action on your topic.